My name is Jim Shepard. I make games about crushing monsters and taking their stuff. Dungeonmans is my pride and joy. A dungeon crawler, roguelike adventure harkens back to good old days of slinging dice with your friends around a table. I want to tell some stories that maybe people haven't heard about, where it came from or why certain decisions were made. The questions I like answering are the ones like, why did you do this? I guess everyone likes to hear themselves talk. Maybe that's part of it. But I know that the Dungeonmans community has a lot of up-and-coming developers as well. From hobbyists to indie devs to even some AAA devs that just hang out all the time in the game dev community. And when we get to share our ideas, or the whys behind decisions, or the mistakes we've made, right, that led to making decisions, that's super duper valuable. So for anyone listening, I appreciate you listening, and hopefully you learned some cool things about Dungeonmans. And man, you can always ask me more. I would love to, in Discord or wherever, to chit chat about the development of the game, because hey, if that helps somebody else make the next great thing that I end up losing a weekend playing, I'm all for it.
So if we could go back all the way to the beginning of your story, what got you into video games in the first place? What are some early memories you have of video games?
Oh man, I talk about this on stream all the time. I've got sitting at my desk a patch, a physical patch from this game called River Raid. It was a 2600 game, and back and then, if you got a high enough score, you could take a Polaroid of your high score and mail it to the game studio, the publisher, and they would mail you back a patch that you would put on your bomber jacket. You wanted to be awesome. So the very first home machine I had was a 2600, and I played that with my dad a whole bunch. That was my first introduction to gaming. I had a ColecoVision also, and on the ColecoVision, I played a shit ton of this game, Gateway to Apshai, which turns out is a randomized dungeon crawler, sort of. And I didn't know at the time I was playing a version of Rogue. I had no idea. So the ColecoVision got a whole bunch of play as well. And then the first arcade game I lost myself in, and I remember this happening in third grade, was Space Harrier. One of the ones you could sit on and would rock back and forth when you were playing it. I mean, that game blew my mind. I still love it. It's still in my top 5. So really, the Origin collection is that. And then in third grade, which is around age 7, 8, I had a class in elementary school that actually taught basic programming, very basic programming. So I got to try to move pixels around on a screen that was resolution 40 by 40. And all I could think about was the wild stuff I was playing on the arcade or back home, and trying to emulate those behaviors on a really limited display with really tiny baby knowledge was not very successful, but a lot of fun.
What got you started in programming? At what point did you start heading down kind of that road into programming and then games eventually?
Well, there's a few places in life where I'm like, wow, I'm blessed or lucky or whatever. And one of those is that I knew what I wanted to do for a very long time. I wanted to make games, right? And it was going to be video games, but I started playing tabletop stuff in my early teens, and I was the group dungeon master before long, and I loved planning games and writing about games, and I still do. I mean, that's my longest running hobby is D&D. I run 2 games, a game every other week, 2 games every other week currently, and I've been playing consistently for decades. So I knew I wanted to make games, and they were going to be video games. There was a time in high school when I was told I should perhaps consider joining the Army because I was part of high school JROTC. And at the time, it didn't seem like the worst idea. It didn't seem like it really fit me either, but there was a lot to like about the people I was spending time with in high school and the leadership there, the people who were mentors to me. So I thought maybe that would happen, but I didn't go that way. I went to teach myself more game development. I went to community college to learn about game development. I ended up going to Full Sail in 2002 to get a degree in game development, and just went from there. I got my first job in AAA in 2004 at Raven Software.
You mentioned Gateway to Apshai, which was the one kind of roguelike that you ended up playing early on. But what was your history with roguelikes? And like while you were like getting into programming, were you playing roguelikes? Is this something that you were very experienced with at the time, or is that just something that kind of came later?
That term escaped me. I didn't hear it for a long time. I didn't hear it until I didn't hear roguelike as a term until the mid 2000s. Right. I just knew that I liked dungeon crawling. Growing up at home, I didn't really have a PC that could get a lot done. My parents got me an Apple II GS because they saw, oh, you use Apple IIs in school. Well, you probably want an Apple II at home. So they got me an Apple II GS. So that's where I learned to do a lot of coding. And I didn't really have access to any software that you couldn't go buy in the store. So I would play a bunch of Police Quest and Space Quest and King's Quest and those Sierra games. But I didn't have a roguelike on the 2GS. I'm sure there were plenty, but I just didn't have one. And there was one game on a neighbor's computer when I had to stay over at Miss Eleanor's place when my mom had to go someplace and I had to stay with Miss Eleanor. I remember she had a computer and she didn't know anything about it, but there was a game on there where if you died, you had to start over. And it was this text dungeon sort of game. And I was just like, wow, this is really cool. I'm fighting gelatinous cubes and kobolds and witches and all the stuff I fight in D&D. What do you mean it's over when you die? Like, it wasn't called Rogue, though. And I'm now looking back on it, I don't know that it was Angband or some variety of that, because the way it rendered the screens are different from what we're used to. It didn't render like Rogue did. It didn't render like Angband did. So I'm not sure what it was. But that was definitely a roguelike. That was absolutely one. It wasn't until much later, when I started playing a bunch of ADOM, that I thought ADOM and Doom RL really are the two games that made me think, my dungeon crawler should be like this.
That's interesting because, I think for a lot of people, the term roguelike didn't exist for a really long time until they needed to be until people started specifically talking about a very specific kind of dungeon crawler, because dungeon crawlers for ages, at least for me, were just dungeon crawlers, right? And a dungeon crawler could be anything from a borderline immersive sim like or even a game like Arx Fatalis all the way to, Rogue. Those were just dungeon crawlers, at least for me. So I don't know when the term actually started being used, but it's just a very interesting specific type of game, and it's always curious to me how people find them. And I guess that just kind of leads on into the next main topic here, which is where did the idea for Dungeonmans come from, and when did you begin working on it?
So there's really a quartet of games that I will say I drew my biggest inspirations from. Tome, before it was Tome 4, when it was actually Tales of Middle-earth, right? Angband is one of them, Doom RL, and Ilona, right? If you're familiar with Ilona, which is this crazy indie Japanese roguelike. And those together, I did play a lot of ADOM as well, but ADOM was a different inspiration for me because it went in a direction that I didn't entirely like. I think ADOM was wonderful, of course, but for fitting my ideas, it didn't quite do that. So I won't say it was like an anti-inspiration, because that's not true. I wanted to be as awesome as ADOM, but it wasn't where I necessarily the fertile ground I drew from. But really, the core of Dungeonmans, right? The very beginning, the reason it exists at all. In fact, if you look at the code when I'm showing it off on stream, this 10 years old, more than that now, this engine, WG 2D renderer, a world generation 2D renderer, and it's because I really like Dwarf Fortress. And Dwarf Fortress lets you build these crazy overworlds with a push of a button. You had all this terrain, these maps with these hills and valleys and rivers and chasms and all this bullshit. You're familiar. And it was amazing. And I was like, wow, can I do that? I want to try that. So I learned to do that. Not as well, of course. But I learned to do that to make an overworld. And this is happening now So my first forays into XNA were in 2007, I think. Maybe 2006 when I was messing with C#, 2007, around there. And in 2008, I had my friend Patrick over for a weekend. We made these really great sandwiches, chicken strips, bacon, cheddar cheese, and ranch, and put them in hot dog buns and ate those. And then just started writing a bunch of code because we're both like pro AAA devs. We were doing serious business work at work. We decided to do something fun and just kit bash around for, not kit bash, just hack around for a weekend. And so I made this world generator, and he was working on rooms and hallways kind of code, to make like for a dungeon. And when I got his stuff and I was like, hey, the world generator can take a guy and we can go into this dungeon. They said, hey, Pat, look at this little Dungeonmans I got running around. And the game was not necessarily christened Dungeonmans at that point, but like that term is one that we used. And I'll head you off. Absolutely, we knew who Homestar Runner was, the Brothers Chaps, Strong Bad, Thy Dungeon Man. Like that is a thing that we were well aware of. But it was just the term, this Dungeonmans I got running around. And so it wasn't even a game. It was just this example of, map generator plus room enterer. And that was the very origin of all of it. Yeah.
When I was researching questions, it seems to read that it was originally very much just kind of like, as you were saying, just something to kind of hack around in on the weekends, very much a side project, hobby type project. And it was also tabled a handful of times while you were working in the industry due to job constraints. And I guess my question is, why did you keep coming back to Dungeonmans?
So everybody's got their pet, right? Their pet thing. What I told you about was 2008, and we were working for, I was working for Midway, for a studio called Surreal here in Seattle, which was owned by Midway. And Surreal went under a little bit after I left. I went to go work at Gearbox, and Gearbox was super cool about working on your own stuff. They have no problem with that as long as you weren't making direct competition. So I got to work on Dungeonmans more in my spare time there. But even then, it was just little tiny fiddly spare time stuff. There were a couple of days, because people liked Dungeonmans. I showed them what I did, and they thought it was cool. And there were 2 days over my time at Gearbox when people came over, 4 or 5 different friends who were artists, and just did an art jam for me, and just made tons of assets in very disparate forms, right? I mean, they were just like 4 different artists cranking out stuff. And I threw them in the game as fast as I could. So all of a sudden, the game that had like one type of monster now had 10, right? And there were just a bunch of new weapons and different things. And I just worked my ass off to try to get the art jam stuff into the game. And it was terrific, right? And it was emboldening too. Like these people, these are coworkers. Some of them are still dear friends to this day. Well, one of them, Jeremy Cook, is the art lead on Dungeonmans. I mean, the game in its final form had art from a lot of sources, but Jeremy was the primary artist, and he helped me also contract out art from other people and coordinate things and try to make sure the game all felt somewhat cohesive. And Jeremy did that out of the goodness of his heart. Like, he loved Dungeonmans, and we're very good friends. We just wanted to help. But he also is a AAA guy and was, real serious at the time at Gearbox because he was working on some really high-end stuff over there. And he couldn't commit full time to D-Mans. I didn't commit full time to D-Mans until I left AAA entirely. My last AAA job it ended in 2012. I was working at BioWare Austin on Star Wars: The Old Republic, and I was there for about a year and a half. We shipped the game. It was great, and then the layoffs happened. Real simple math. Like, the target for the game was to ship and get Metacritic 90 and have a certain amount of subscribers. And when we shipped, we had Metacritic 85 and a smaller number of subscribers. So there were going to be people losing jobs. And 400 people lost their jobs. It was wild. A lot of people got laid off of that project. And I was one of them. And I said, well, I'm kind of done with AAA. Can I do this independently? And some friends said, why don't you take Dungeonmans and work on it full time? And I said, no. No one's going to buy this game. It's no one's going to buy Dungeonmans. It's very silly, and it doesn't look great. And, it's whatever. And my friend said, well, what about Dungeons of Dreadmore? People bought that. Dreadmore is silly, and it's a dungeon crawler. And I said, Dreadmore is excellent, but it's a team. And this is just me, and I can't make art that good. I had all these excuses. So I worked on a different game for a little bit that I tried for 3.5, 4 months. And it was a idle marching game about going through a dungeon. There's something out there now. There's a Forgotten Realms, Idle Heroes of the Realms, or something like that. It's pretty much that game. but worse. And I never really got anywhere with it. But I didn't enjoy working on it. I felt the idea felt kind of sketchy. I just couldn't really get my feet under it. And somebody finally slapped me upside the head. Just like, just fucking make Dungeonmans. Like, why don't you just make that game? So enough people told me to do it that I did. And that's when I went into it full time, like every day, all the time. And that was late 2012. The plan was to make a Kickstarter, and I did. Kickstarter happened in 2013. I had a couple people. That's about when I met Andrew Aversa, the musician for Dungeonmans, who is now a really dear friend of mine. But I'm rambling. You can stop me anytime.
Whenever I see developers, because often like I'll see developers go and they will get into indie and they'll be indie, and then I'll see developers that start off indie and maybe they'll work their way into AAA. But for me, at least in my experience talking with people in the industry, it's very rare to see somebody go from AAA work to then indie.
Right.
So that kind of transfer, I think, is very curious to me. It's really interesting hearing about how would you use that expertise that you learned, or how does the project management when you're only doing like a tiny part of a project to then suddenly going to working on a whole project, like that's all just a completely different workflow. So that is just kind of a fascinating side of it to me.
So a lot of my friends in the AAA business who are still there, making tons of money and these big serious games, and at the top of their careers. And they will say every now and then, man, I wish I could do what you did. And I said, dude, I only did this because I got laid off and I didn't want to look for more work. But also, my life choices allowed this. I don't have any kids. Don't want any, neither just my wife, right? So, and I was, even at the time when I made this decision, I was with a partner who didn't want any kids. So there was much less to risk, right? I had some money put away, but my partner was working full time, and we knew, well, we can take this risk, right? And it's not the same as saying, take a risk, and if it doesn't work out, you've got to sell your children on the black market or something, or you can't feed them or whatnot. Like, that's a huge, huge thing. So, everyone's got their ups and downs, but I chose a path that let me take this risk. And as far as bringing AAA experience over to it, I learned a lesson in 2008. This is important. I had an interview at Valve. And I had a really good friend who worked there. He was one of my mentors at Raven. He ended up working at Valve, and he said, well, before you leave, because I was going from Surreal to Gearbox, he's like, okay, Gearbox gave you an offer. Come to Valve and just do an interview anyway. You already have an offer in hand. What's the worst that happens? So I went and did this interview. And, this is 12 years ago, so I'm not going to reveal like deep, dark Valve secrets, but I mean, it's a different interview now. But they asked me a bunch of things. They made me do some examples, and we did whiteboards, and it was like about 6 hours of stuff. And at the end, they sat down and they said, okay, we're not going to give you the job, but here's why. They said, it seems like you're someone who's used to working on a task list and making things for your fellow developers, or making things to knock out a task list, but you don't ever think about the customer. And I said, okay, what do you mean? And they said, well, when we do anything, we got to think about, who are we entertaining? Who's going to buy this? Are we making something they're going to enjoy? And you got to have that picture in your head of who it is. And that's the person that becomes your razor for making some of these decisions. And they pointed out examples in like the whiteboard stuff and the pretend games that I made that man, that stuck with me. I clung to that, and that was a piece of something I got from AAA that helped me in the rest of my AAA career. I always thought about the customer for like, even when I'm working on a tool or something at a studio, like, well, who's this tool for? I really thought about them and how they use it, and try to talk to them more, and just think, this is the person I'm selling it to, quote unquote. I'm giving it to them, and they're my coworker. And then when I'm doing stuff for my community, it's not like, where do I make money? It's not cynical like that, but I'm making the game I want to make. What's the audience for that? Once I figure out who that audience is, that helps make the decisions for Dungeonmans that are appropriate. There are things that I could put in Dungeonmans that I don't, even though I think they'd be neat, because they don't really fit the Dungeonmans aesthetic and they don't really fit the player base. So they go in a different game, right? And that is a big thing I picked up from AAA, and I think anybody who makes games can really benefit from it. Like, who are we making this for? Not just from a straight capitalist, like, who will pay for it standpoint, but just like, who are you going to entertain? Who are the people you're going to make smile and laugh? Who are you going to make lose a weekend, crushing monsters until 2 a.m.? Like, who are they? And once you know who they are, that helps you guide the decisions you make when you're putting your game together.
That must have been the like most soul crushing but also interesting interview ever. That's fascinating.
It was great. I already had an offer at Gearbox, so I wasn't like
Yeah.
doing cartwheels to. It would have been great to work at Valve when I think about it, but at the same time, man, I'm really happy where I am exactly right now. So I will not change too many anchor points in the time stream, if you will.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I'm good with what's going on now. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the Kickstarter, just kind of in broad strokes, because Kickstarter was, and like, people might have forgotten by now, but Kickstarter was a very different place in like the
Oh,
like
so different.
2012 until like 2015. Kickstarter was so different. Like things were wild. There was projects popping off left and right that basically just had concept art, and some of them came out and some of them didn't. So
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
one of the, I guess, like successful Kickstarters that like delivered more or less on time and everything, what was your experience with Kickstarter like back then? And then I'm gonna ask about what your opinions are on Kickstarter now.
So the key to success for the Kickstarter, I think, and I mentioned this guy again, my friend Andrew Aversa, um, he really helped me from the both the business angle and just like the sort of brotherly support angle in terms of seeing this success. So he is a musician and a game developer. He's a developer now. He was a game musician for a long time. His handle is Zircon. He's done a million tracks at Overclock Remix. He's done other stuff on his own. I was introduced to him by a friend. This friend of mine, his handle's FF Music DJ. We met in college, and I'm like, dude, you're the best. I've heard your music at Overclock Remix all the time. FF Music DJ, you're so cool. And he says, thanks, let's be friends. So we became friends. And he said, Jim, if you're ever making a game and need somebody, I'm your guy for music. So the time came for the Kickstarter, and I'm like, I need a theme for this game, this Dungeonmans. And I said, FF Music DJ, the time has come. I need a theme for my game, and you're my guy. And he says, well, I'm really busy. I said, okay. He said, but hold on. I know a guy who can take care of you. His name is Andy. And he goes by Zircon. And I'm like, no, not the Zircon. Zircon's too fucking cool. Like, there's no way his music is so good. I said, just shut up and meet this guy. So we started talking, and it turns out that Andrew and I have really similar tastes in a lot of things and the same burning desire to bring the turn-based roguelike to the next level, right? Because he was playing Dungeonmans, the early demo, and he was telling me, he's like, damn it, I've always wanted to make something like this. Like, he told me that. And I was like, well, let's get the ball rolling and maybe we can. So there was him and an artist, Rose Fry. I told them, look, let's make this game, and there's a Kickstarter, and you guys both get X% of whatever the number is on the board. Right, not after taxes, not after Kickstarter, but like that number on the board, you guys both get X%. So let's just make that number very big, and we'll go. And so we did. And you're right. Back in the day, in 2013, anybody could run a Kickstarter with some concept art and some wild ass ideas. And I felt like I needed to prove something, right? I needed to say, look, I have a game. You can play it. It goes from level 1 to level 6. There's end condition. Like, there's a demo here that's totally viable. And I didn't make as much money as some games that were like, oh, you're going to be able to invent Jesus and be your own Jesus and rule a whole galaxy by yourself. And here's some concept art. Those games made like 3 times as much money, 4 times as much money, and never delivered anything. But I kind of just said, here's a game you can play. And they were like, oh, okay, well, here's some money. And I succeeded. I asked for 35 and I got 43. And I didn't have to like cheeseball it. Like that was my actual, like that's where I succeeded at. And I remember seeing these games that got like way more for having some really pretty pixel art that never delivered shit. And I don't know. It's not the same anymore. That time is long past. If I did a Kickstarter again, it would be a different story for sure. But you can't really kickstart video games the way you used to. Kickstarter now is for games, marginalized communities, usually find success there. Games outside the US will find success on Kickstarter. And games from really big existing names. Like those are your 3 communities, right? So if you've got, if you've got a game that's like, hey, I'm a person of color, or I'm a trans girl making this game, that community really responds strongly to that, right? And they usually don't ask for a whole bunch of money, but like the community binds together pretty quickly. If you are making a game and from a country that's not the US and you push that as a selling point, you find a lot of success in that too. Like, hey, this is a dungeon crawler from Romania, and like, boom, you get a whole bunch of support from your fellow Romanians, as it should. This is not me being bitter. I think this is really cool. I love to see what it's become. And then the third thing is if you're a big name and you've made some big name stuff and you want to just put your swaggy big name on the game you're making, you'll find success there as well. In video games, I think that's it. And I'm not sure I fit into any of those three. So I'm not sure I'd be doing another Kickstarter.
From my perspective, Kickstarter has kind of become like external marketing for people to get more funding for a project that already has funding.
Oh, right. There's that too.
Then kind of, as you were saying, marginalized communities with a dedicated audience that's willing to fund a thing as soon as the money is available. But also a lot of those games are now just getting funded on like Patreon. So like to a degree, I think that Kickstarter has just kind of become a different beast these days. It's probably better off for that now, but it's always kind of curious to hear about what people have to say about Kickstarter then versus where Kickstarter's at now. You know, like I did a long video with Cornell on Jupiter Hell and hearing his take on Kickstarter back when he Kickstarted kind of at the tail end of Kickstarter being popping off and being big is very interesting hearing like just different perspectives on the subject.
Yeah, it's, you know, I kind of wish, well, I don't wish I did anything different. I'm glad I showed what I did because I felt like it was important. Oh, man, the Kickstarter video that I made, people watch it and then they watch my stream and they're like, what the hell was wrong with you in that video? And the answer was, I felt so serious about this idea of like, I'm asking someone for money. Hi, I'm Jim Shepard and I'm the developer behind Dungeonmans. I've been a gameplay programmer in the AAA space since 2004. My last ship project was Star Wars: The Old Republic. In recent times, I've been very fortunate to work independently on an adventure I think everyone will enjoy. I didn't use a handle. I used my name. I'm Jim Shepard and I want your dollars, right? And I know that I could get a pass on that. I'm a straight white dude, so there's a whole bunch of things that don't happen to me on the internet that would happen to other people. I understand that. But I didn't want to hide behind a pseudonym if I was asking people for their cash. And that's probably naive or like old man of me to think that way, because a lot of people just, you know, use their handles and then get a bunch of money and maybe they deliver, maybe they don't. But I felt like I was building a commitment to these customers. And you know what? There are people in my community still who were Discord or who are Kickstarter backers and are still day-to-day members of the Dungeonmans community. So in a sense, like that did pay off for me in terms of really trying to build relationships with folks.
See, I think that's interesting because I still do back games on Kickstarter from time to time. And when I see somebody using a handle and not using a studio name or not using a real name, I get suspicious.
Really?
I'm always immediately concerned. Okay, you're using a handle. What are you hiding? Are you going to disappear? Are you somebody else? Who are you?
I'd say you're just going to vanish?
Yeah.
Right.
You know, Kickstarter's, like I said, it's a weird beast. And at this point, most of the games I Kickstart are games that are made by people that I've Kickstarted in the past or are games that are people with a track record, right, of delivery.
Right.
But after the Dungeon Man was Kickstarted and you got the funding, what were the next few months like? Like, I asked earlier about like kind of the process from moving from AAA to indies. So like, how did you tackle like the next 3 to 6 months post Kickstarter?
Yeah. So at that point, I was living in Baltimore with my partner at the time, and probably one of the toughest times for me, like in terms of, you know, the story of one person's journey through life. Like Baltimore was not my favorite city. It was the tail end of a stressful and difficult relationship with somebody who it ended up falling apart 3 months before Dungeonmans shipped. So I did work very hard on Dungeonmans. I threw myself into it. It just was my 9 to 5, right? But I mean, it's never just 9 to 5. It's, you know, all the time, always. You know, I'm an extrovert and I really love people and I'm a social butterfly, but I was working at home. My partner at the time, she had a job at the studio where we went to Baltimore to go so she could work there. So she was the one who was like going out and like, okay, listen, like our job is simple. I stay home, you go out and make friends and then bring them over so we can have friends to hang out with. And she's like, sure. But it never happened that way. So I was kind of like always by myself at home. I had these really long philosophical conversations with the guy who cut my lawn, right? Because like I needed somebody to talk to. And I made Andrew as a friend, Zircon, because he didn't live very far away, actually. It turned out he lived pretty close. But streaming happened. I said, when the game was in the middle of the Kickstarter, I said, someone's got to play Dungeonmans on stream. Well, it's got to be me, right? So I made a channel called Play Dungeonmans. And I started to play Dungeonmans on stream to show the game off. And that was during the Kickstarter. So it was the very beginning of my my reaching into that. And then this ties into your question, like what was it like after the Kickstarter? Is I kept streaming. Eventually I put my face on screen. I was very afraid to show my code, afraid to show my face. You understand, like I was just not very timid at first. But then that is what kept me going, is having that stream and being able to have these new people that I can talk to enter my day to day. It was awesome. It was great. No doubt there. And then so I ended up leaving Baltimore and I drove across the country to Seattle. That's where I live now. Just about this time in 2014, like late September 2014, drove across the country and then spent the last 3 months of Dungeonmans development working my tail off, trying to piece together, post-heartbreak sadness, also shipping video game. And the game shipped December 2014, and I'm very proud of it. And it had a lot of localized success. I mean, I'm not going to say it blew the doors off the universe, but like I just found out that so many people were made happy from it that it really made it all worthwhile for sure. Financially, it didn't take too long to recover the investment of the Kickstarter money, and then a little bit afterwards, if you look at, well, what would I have paid myself, I guess, in terms of like salary over that time, it depends. But the game has recouped its costs since. I mean, it's been 7 years now, so one would hope so. But I mean, that launch period was very stressful, but turned out to be a good time. And I made a cool game and made a lot of friends. So overall, it's a win.
What was it like launching a game on Steam in 2014? Like Steam was, again, a lot different. I mean, there was way fewer games coming out. Like this was during Steam Greenlight. Like it wasn't quite the constant tidal wave of games that are just getting dumped onto the platform now. Do you think that was helpful at the time?
What was helpful to me was when the Greenlight. So I remember getting my Greenlight notice at GDC 2013. I was sitting at a conference and I got an email that says, "Congratulations, your Greenlight is successful." And I'd been running a Greenlight campaign for a while and not really getting anywhere. And what's interesting is that if I had, at the time when the Greenlight campaign started, if I had seen the numbers, the yes votes and no votes, the no's so outweighed the yeses for that Greenlight campaign, and if I had known that, I'd have probably stopped. But I didn't. They only showed you like some modified bar graph that didn't show any no's. It just showed like some ascension of like your bar going up. And I had no idea how many people didn't like that first Greenlight pitch. I just knew that the Greenlight pitch was moving. So I was like, yeah, cool, let's make this game. And so that's the difference is like now you see a lot of data. I mean, you don't have the Greenlight anymore, but like you see a lot of yes, no's on your game very quickly. The reviews came out. The reviews were way positive. I was able to get to 90% and I stayed there. And that's way different from the Greenlight, which would have been significantly less. But I just, there weren't as many other games. That's true. They introduced, I call them marketing cooldowns. Like you use this thing and you get bonus marketing for like, at the time it was, you get bonus marketing for a week. Now it's bonus marketing based on number of views. You get it for about a month, but you use these power-ups they give you, and they will market your game extra hard to a community that they believe will buy it for a certain amount of time. And I've had those for years, and when you use them, they're gone. Sometimes you get a bonus one for use. If you use it if you use it and it does well enough, you get an extra one to use again later. It's very gamey. This is all this weird Steam backend shit. So you get a marketing cooldown bonus if you do a good one. It was easy to see my game stick around the new games section for a while. And also too, it was just the roguelike community, this is the golden age of roguelikes, right? I mean, like that, when that was happening, there were so many cool games coming out. So many cool roguelikes were happening, and I was just one of them. And I will say, I think Dreadmore kicked it off, right? For the golden age of roguelikes. I think Dreadmore can probably say they kicked that off. And like the $15 roguelike became a genre. And I was one of the first in there. And it's different now. Like roguelike has a million different meanings, and it's,
a muddy mess.
Tangle Deep. Right? Tangle Deep is a game that I worked on. I helped Andrew Aversa, who I've been talking about. That's his game. I helped him finish it. I helped him port it to the Switch. And we saw a review of it that happened not too long ago where somebody talked about Tangle Deep as a roguelike with an interesting twist. It's turn-based.
There's a review of Jupiter Hell that says the same thing.
Can't you believe this shit? Yeah, that word meant more in 2014. So the core of like the roguelike community, the roguelike players, was a little bit tighter. I mean, obviously we all want a bigger, better audience. We want to bring more people into the fold. I'm not talking about gatekeeping. I just mean that there were the people who were playing that type of game knew more about other roguelikes as well. So they were more connected to the core of the genre. Nowadays, it's a Wildlands. And if I were to make a Dungeonmans 2 like tomorrow, I don't think that I would be pushing roguelike as the big term anymore. I would just say dungeon crawler, right? And even if it is a roguelike in the truest traditions of roguelikes, that word just doesn't really have the same weight, and it doesn't really mean as much as it used to. So why include it when you only have limited space?
It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. I've been pushing run-based for everything that is more modern, but I can only do so much.
Run-based, interesting. So, run-based, okay.
Anything that involves, dying and starting with either some sort of progress gained in any genre could be considered run-based, and you could tag that onto any genre, like Spelunky, a run-based platformer, like Moon Crash in Prey, which was a documentary I was watching right before we started this call that NoClip did. That's their run-based DLC. It's a first-person shooter, Ziggurat, which is a series of first-person wizard shooters that I really like, kind of akin to Quake.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Those are run-based FPS games. It's like, they're so far removed, but like that's the only mechanic that they retain. So what if that's the... Like, if Call of Duty is a multiplayer first-person shooter with RPG elements, why can't you make a platformer with run-based elements?
I think run-based is a great term. I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I will, because the game I'm working on right now, actually, the game I work on in the mornings that you have seen when you came by the stream, run-based is a good way to put it, because it is based on shorter runs, and the runs are different every time, and that is a fine term. Fine term.
Well, let's talk about Dungeonmans itself. So roguelikes, as we were kind of just talking about, are stuck in a very specific niche. And at the time, they were a little bit more well-known as dungeon crawlers. Like when people said the word roguelike, a lot more people thought of like the more traditional dungeon crawler. What kind of audience specifically were you aiming for, and how were you trying to kind of reach that audience through like the humor, the art, the music? Like, what exactly were you doing to try and like make the game appealing to your potential audience?
So the idea with Dungeonmans, when you're doing what the game asks you to do, when you're facing its challenges, when you're reading the words, when you're using the items, it should feel like sitting down, play D&D with me. And not one-to-one, right? But I wanted to say, this is the sort of feeling I want to give my players at a regular Dungeons & Dragons table. How do I do this in dungeon crawler form? I mean, it's clearly not a deep role-playing game, right? So this isn't about NPC development and so on. But there's this feeling of, it's all kind of lighthearted, but the gameplay itself is serious, right? So the game doesn't take itself super seriously, but the gameplay does. And to me, that's a pretty core aspect. I wanted players who could appreciate that, really wanted a challenge, who wanted to sink their teeth into something, but also didn't necessarily... I mean, man, how many trailers have you watched for games where the first thing you see is like, in the world of like Ascendor or something, and it's just these words that make no sense to you because they're about another random fantasy place, and who cares, and nobody cares, and like they'll talk about, like, they'll use these unique names to describe things for the first 20 seconds, but really it's just could be anything, right? That to me was the irrelevant part. The first thing the player can do is name the world whatever they want. They can name it whatever the hell they feel like. The important part is you're crushing monsters, you're exploring, you're growing, you're finding items, you're living and dying. The music was meant to evoke early PS1 era RPGs. That is the tone that Andy went for. Used the same sort of sound canvas for that as well. The art was around that level too, because it's not like chunky, 16-bit pixel. It was, and not painterly either. It's just like a higher fidelity pixel art. In fact, it was too high fidelity, really. We went for like 80 wide by 128 tall for most of the sprites, which is a lot of pixels. And that was why there's no animations. We said, well, we could have like one monster animated or 10 monsters not animated, right? Like that was the decision, was looking like, how do we do this? And by not animating them, we gave them cool action poses. So all the heroes, when you pick a hero in Dungeonmans, they're in a different action pose. They're mid-run, they're mid-swing, they're standing there swaggering. They have this like tabletop miniatures look to them. Maybe that wasn't the right call, but that was definitely a choice on purpose. That was my choice, and I said, I want the characters to look like they're in the middle of doing something cool, or in some sort of like interesting pose, and then we'll just bounce them around on screen, rather than saying, okay, well here's one hero sprite, but it animates. I would rather have 20 hero sprites and just have them be in different cool poses doing cool stuff. I don't know if that was the right call. I think really the answer is have 20 hero sprites and animate them. Just get more money, they just need more money to do it. Like that's just the answer, is more than what I had. But that was the goal, is to create this sort of like, you've got these heroic characters and fearsome monsters. The music is stirring heroism in you. It's stirring the sense of exploration in these deep, dark dungeons. And you have a lighthearted description of things. It's not like over-the-top memes. It's not slap-you-in-the-face comedy. But it's also, like the potions. For instance, Dreadmore, right, another humor roguelike, and the first one, is really different from Dungeonmans. And part of that is because I didn't play Dreadmore very much when it came out. When I started playing it, I said, oh, this isn't another funny roguelike. I don't want anything to do with this. I can't play this because I don't want to be influenced by it. So I kind of I admired it from a distance until Dungeonmans was done. But in Dreadmore, like, there's vending machines that sell you food, and there's the Lutefisk god and other stuff that's just like so wacky goofball. We tried not to go that way in Dungeonmans. Dungeonmans has stuff like, real monsters, but there's a dungeon crab rat. That's kind of silly looking. Why is it always rats in the dungeon? Well, these rats have crab shells, and they have claws and pincers, and, we wanted things to still seem fierce, even if they were a bit silly. The weapons are fierce, even if they're a bit goofy named, and things still had a sort of menace to them, and because it's a dungeon with monsters and it's life or death, like that still had to sell,
So one of the, at least for the time, definitely, and I think one of the more important parts of Dungeonmans for me personally is the academy. You go back to home base and you upgrade the home base, and it maybe gives you some benefits going forward, or some ease of access to more variety later on on a different character, which I've now seen like implemented in a run-based game after run-based game after run-based game. Where did that idea come from for the academy?
Ilona, which I mentioned before, this crazy Japanese roguelike, Ilona has a great system for, you have a home base, you can build a museum, you can build a farm, you can kind of populate the world with these buildings that you can then do stuff in. Sometimes it's just for decoration, other times it's to make some money on the side, other times it's to make certain item types. And I just like home base type games too. I love the idea of like making your home base better. To me, it's one of Dungeonmans' failings is that you can't decorate your academy, right? You can't put new paintings up or move the walls around. Like, you can't do very much with that. But it does serve as like a living home base, grows with your gameplay. When your characters die, they go to the graveyard gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But sometimes when they die, if they're high enough level, they can teach. And so they're ghost teachers that make the academy bigger with more places to go. The library expands, the alchemy lab expands. To me, I wanted to take some of the sting off, like the death. And so you don't have to use any of that meta progression stuff. When you die in Dungeonmans, you can just start over and carry nothing with you. It's fine. But you may also choose to say, well, I'm going to start in that same academy, and hey, the last person found a sword they couldn't use, and left it in the Academy war chest. Let me grab that, and I could use it because they were playing a Wizardmans, but I'm a Fighterman, so I can use this sword. It created a reason to get back on the horse beyond the simple desire of like, I just want to play again, which is great. I mean, I play roguelikes. You die, you lose everything. You just want to play again. But there was something cool about like having this tradition and having these characters. You can't use the same character name twice in Dungeonmans. If you use a character's name and then they die, and you play again, and you put that same name in, the game says, sorry, that person already graduated and they've passed, but how about naming them the second or junior or something, right? In fact, if you put a character name together and then you go to pick from your stats and you look at all the stat rolls you get, you said you don't want any of those stat rolls, that person never even goes to the academy, but they still exist in the world. And so what you just did is you named a shopkeeper somewhere, or maybe you named a bandit leader somewhere. And people almost never notice. They just kill them and they just crush over them and it's no problem. But like when you get somebody who's rejected from the academy, they could go live a life of crime and run one of the roadblocks out in the wild. And people, it's a hidden feature. People don't often see it. Maybe I should draw more attention to it. I'm not sure.
Huh.
But that was the level of consistency I wanted to have. Is like you have this place where your graduates are graduating from here, research is deepening, the blacksmith's getting stronger, the alchemy lab percolates, the museum gets bigger. This is your progress alongside your run-to-run progress as well.
So, like, first off, I just need to mention that my brain just exploded with the shopkeeper and like the names just going out into the world thing, because I had no idea. That's fascinating. I think I've like not taken characters once or twice, but generally I always take them. So there's not that many out there. But now I just want to go name like 50 people and just boot them out into the world.
They'll show up. Yeah,
it's neat. I think that in and of itself, at least for the time, for like Western roguelikes at the very least, was very innovative. And I think it was really interesting. But something else that Dungeonmans also do, which you just kind of touched on, was the selection of stats and the way classes work in Dungeonmans. I usually end up playing some sort of weird Fightermans, Bannermans hybrid with banners, but also big swords. At what point did you decide to kind of go with a classless system and like simplify the character creation down to its most basic fundamentals, instead of like, having something that's more akin to Stone Soup where there's a billion classes and a billion stats that you have to eyeball for 5 minutes before you even know what they do, let alone like actually like selecting things?
My dear friend Don Eubanks, another developer I met at Gearbox, and he always laments when the game makes you make a choice without giving you complete information. And I mean complete information. So when he's like, when the game says pick a class, he's like, well, wait a minute. Like, what happens at level 30 with this class? Like, do I know the ramifications 100 hours later of what I'm choosing now? Like, he's really big on that. And I like spell swords. My favorite type of character to play, I think the Gish is what they're called, or the Jish, maybe the Gish, where they just, you have someone who can do melee and magic together. So to me, the class system of Dungeonmans, where it's like, there's these masteries you choose from at the academy, and you just sort of layer them together to build your own hero, like, just felt like the way to go. That way, you're not making any sort of crippling lifelong decisions at level 1. You've got your Fighterman's path. There's like a few powers you can get. And the original, the alpha for Dungeonmans only had like, it would have Fighterman's and have 5 powers. It wasn't like split into just 2 sets of 3 like it is now. Fighterman's, Rangerman, Wizardman's, and just have like 5 powers. And so you'd have these really limited progressions, but you could mix and match. And people like mixing and matching. And I like mixing and matching. So it just seemed like that was a really easy one there. The harder one was streamlining the stats. There was originally a stat in Dungeonmans called Swagger. And this is in 2012, before that term blew up and became like swaggy, big swaggy nuts, or look at my swag, like all that. This Swagger was a stat. And then that became too much a meme, right? So I dropped it and renamed it to Bombast. So how bombastic was your Dungeonmans? Like, I wanted something that could suit for charisma, but it was not charisma. And then I realized, you know what? We're fine with 4 stats. And I even made it so kind of there's only like strength is the beating heart of every Dungeonmans. It increases your maximum health and all the damage you do. So every character wants to have their strength go up. But then you've got FOOM and skills and science, and those are your kind of your branching stats that are not exactly the same. But like even a wizard man's wants strength, right? I mean, you want to be healthier, you want to blow things up better. So points of strength and FOOM, and there you go. Like skills, well, that's ranged critical hits and your accuracy with that stuff. And science, well, if you're drinking potions all the time, or if you're making things bleed, or if you're cursing them, you want your science to go up. But everybody wants strength. So those are really limited stat selections there. And that is also to the game's benefit because it let me do stuff like have resists be another big deal, right? You only got 4 core stats, but you need to watch your resists go up as well. You have to resist certain damage types because eventually if you don't, you go into a dungeon full of ice skeletons and you get frozen to death right away because you don't have cold resist. And working on your resists is another path of growth in Dungeonmans.
Yeah, I usually die to poison.
Oh, I should tell you one more. Hold on. The Necromancer and the Bannermans used to be hidden classes. And you'd have to find stuff in the world and bring them back to the academy, and then they'd teach you how to play those classes. And I did that early on, and people just didn't like it. They're like, I just want to be a Bannerman's right away. And I thought, well, shouldn't it be like an advanced class or a locked away class? And I thought, no, Bannermans is awesome. Necromancer is awesome. Let those just be open at the beginning, and I'll make these master's programs that are really hidden away, that are combinations of things. And the Bannermans used to have 6 different banners. Instead, there's only 2 now. And as you put points in the banner, that banner just gets stronger. But it used to be there were 6 different banners with 6 different effects. And that was really stupid of me. I didn't realize until I started playing with it, like, who wants to put 6 banners on their bar and have to keep looking to see which one does which? Like, holy shit. Like, let's just put in, 2 and have them grow. So the 2 banners are thematic now. One of them is about melee damage and fighting underneath it. The other one is about range damage and putting it where your enemies are. And it's just like they split more evenly that way. But that was a streamlining that happened live. Like, I shipped with 6 banners, and I shipped with these mistakes. And I had to learn live and not patch and update them to make those better based on player feedback.
I was going to bring up with classes, you do kind of section them off during character creation. So it actually took me a little while when I started playing the game because I started playing the game late. I didn't actually get Dungeonmans until I think about 2018 when a friend gifted it to me because I was playing too much Tome, and he's like, "Here, play a game that doesn't make your brain melt." Right. It actually took me a while to figure out that Dungeonmans didn't have set classes. It took me about 3 or 4 runs, I would say, because in the character creation, it has they're not really even different classes. They're just this Dungeonmans has stats preset into wizard stuff. This one has some stats preset into fighting. Right. Whereas the actual just gameplay is the bottom one, which is just assign your stats.
Yes.
And I think that's a really interesting choice because it's it tricks the player into not screwing themselves up with a terrible build, but also at the same time simplifies the character creation even more without telling you.
It thank you. It does those things by design. It also is a way for players to think they're setting a difficulty mode because the classes have relative complexity to them. Rangerman's is absolutely the easiest if you're going to just take that path. It has an escape for you. It has 2 escapes, actually, quick dash and stick and move. It hits things before they get close to you. It is the simplest class to succeed with early on. And so it's there under beginner difficulty, right? And then things go up from there. So you can't really pick a difficulty in the game, but you can look at the classes and say, well, what do I want to try? And eventually at the very bottom is Dungeonmans, experts only, right? Because you are then free to do whatever you want, which includes forgetting to put your armor in and walking out of the academy wearing nothing. People do that as well. And that's why it is listed in the highest complexity because you're responsible for everything. But the early stuff, I just pick Rangermans. It's fine, You stick and move to get out of trouble, save half your stamina for escapes, you'll win, no problem. Easy peasy.
Pay to lose. Difficulty. Why did you go with that naming first off? And were people asking for more difficulty options? Where did the idea for that little DLC come from?
There were a few things. First of all is when I created new content, I gave it away. The Psychomancer was a class that I just built and handed out. And a whole new class you could probably get away with selling, right, as a $5 expansion or something.
Oh, easy.
Hatch and Slash, all the pet stuff, I probably could have sold that too. But it just didn't feel right to me to do that. And I think I'll do it. For future games, I'll do that. But for Dungeonmans, because of how community driven it was, because of how it was kickstarted, everything was just so like, people helped me build this up from nothing that I felt like I wanted to just put new ideas into players' hands and say thank you right away. However, it's nice to get more money to make things, right? And so, well, what sort of DLC will I make? And I thought, well, I don't want to include anything where somebody says, hey, I paid $5 and now the game is easier, right? Like, now I have this new class, and this new class has new swords, and of course they're OP because of game balance issues. Well, what if you just paid to lose instead? And I said, is this a joke name or what is this? And I thought, well, okay, hold on. Like, there's so many roguelike trappings that I'm just not using. What if I put those roguelike trappings into the game? So many of the pay-to-lose options are just things other roguelikes do, right? You can starve to death finally. Cool. You can get injuries. Great. And you can do all that shit that I think is boring, but fine. If you want to bleed out slowly because the wrong monster hits you too often, if you want your weapons to break, if you want, all this negative stuff to happen to you, be my guest, right? And to be fair, it can be really entertaining. There's some better, there's some runs I've had that are better because I have stuff like food going on, like where I'm like, okay, believe it or not, it's actually entertaining to like stop and eat every now and then, even though you're just eating the same regular stuff, or having to take a nap between dungeons. Like, that's not so bad. But really, Pay to Lose was about saying, here's a more complex game with options for you to create your own situation, enough rope to hang yourself with. Go. Like, that's Pay to Lose. And it has not sold terrifically well. I mean, it does sell sometimes. Here's what really happened. This is the best part of it. So there are these chocolate covered caramels I really like. On my Twitch page, you can find a link to them on Amazon. People have donated them to me sometimes. And when I added Pay to Lose and the game lets you starve and the game lets your weapons break and all that injury stuff, I got an email from Tarn Adams, the Dwarf Fortress guy, who was like, this is awesome. I'm buying you some caramels. And so he did. And I felt like a hero for that, just for having that exchange. Like, that's what Pay to Lose got me. There's the big win right there.
Shoutouts to Tarn. That's great.
Yeah, Tarn is great. I've had the good fortune of hanging out with him a few times at Roguelike Celebration and other events, and he is absolutely one of the coolest cats. I was surprised, but he is very fun to hang out with. Yeah.
You very briefly mentioned Hatch and Slash, and I just have a question on my outline, which just says chickens, ... what?
Why? Yeah. About a year and change ago, probably early in the pandemic, maybe right before the pandemic, somebody came by the channel whose name was Hatch Poultry Farms. This is during a stream. Hatch Poultry Farms. Said, hey, you probably don't remember me. And I said, well, that name is not familiar. But hi, welcome to the stream. And he said, well, I had a different name before, and I came onto your channel because I was asking, if I really don't like programming, how do I make myself like it? And he relayed a story, which I did remember, where basically his parents were like, look, you need to learn to code because coding's the future and you can be a programmer and so on. And he was looking for ways to get better at it. And I told him, and I remember this, telling him on camera, man, if you don't like it, don't do it. Right? Like, you can't force yourself to love writing code. If the puzzle of like solving programming problems doesn't give you excitement, even when it's frustrating, you're never going to like the work. So don't do it. And that was months ago. Well, it turns out he wouldn't told his parents, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm going to do what I really want to do, which is raise poultry. So he started a poultry farm. And Hatch Poultry Farms, he started raising a quail farm with like quail eggs and birds and the whole 9 yards. And came back to stream to tell me this. He would visit the stream often, and we'd talk about birds. I have sitting next to me a catalog from Hatch Poultry Farms because I actually went to his website and ordered one. So there's a list of like quail prices and pictures of all these different fancy birds. Unfortunately, I think he's gone out of business. The pandemic, of course, is tough on everybody. I think he's got another venture spinning up. I'm not exactly sure about that. I shouldn't say too much. That story, like, really got me. I mean, this is me blowing my own horn again, but like, holy cow, I affected somebody's life in a pretty positive way. And the magic of streaming, the magic of making games, the magic of community, the magic of all this stuff, like, it was just profound. And so I said to him, if I ever end up making pets, man. And he also, he was a very supportive community member while he was around here too. I said, if I make pets, it'll be battle poultry. Because he had these really crazy looking quails, like these wild looking beasts with this spiky hair, and they look like baby chocobos, man. It was out of control. And I told him if there's ever going to be, pets, they're going to be battle poultry. And so I made that promise come true.
That is and way more wholesome than I was expecting. Wow.
It's all true. It's all true. It's silly to have birds fighting alongside you, right? I mean, and I thought about a pet class where you could like take over monsters and have like a Trigger at your side, and then the Trigger has certain Trigger powers and all this. But man, there's the mix and match feeling that comes from like, when you got your Pokemans, right? And you mix and match their powers and it feels pretty good. This other game I was playing too, Saga Frontier, you can get a monster in your group and they just change shape almost at random. And I realized that I wanted that. I wanted to start with a simple bird and then make it really tough or really swift or really melee focused, really range focused, and watch it evolve. And my friend Jeremy, who I mentioned earlier, the artist, he made these sprites and he's like, man, I'm in. Like, let's make a grid of chickens, right? Of different, like on the matrix of tough, swift, range melee. Let's make this grid and move out to those directions as we start putting points in the birds. And that's where it all came from.
I know a few people who've gotten their first wins in Dungeonmans because of the battle poultry. Like they're just kind of probably some of the hardest belly laughs I've had playing the game, actually, just in general, because it's like there's something just amazing about like just waiting a couple turns and letting your chicken just run into a room and then the camera just starts shaking because everything's exploding.
God, exactly.
It's too damn funny.
Right. You're dead right. Someone was just talking to me about this today, and I said, it helps two things. The battle poultry helps two things. The first is that it solves the difficulty spike between level 6 and 8 in Dungeonmans, where things get pretty hard quickly. The birds help take the edge off of that. But two, it makes the early game a little more fun for veteran players who are making like their 10th mans and are kind of tired of levels 1 through 4, because it just exactly like you said, you're playing and you're fighting monsters, but then off in the distance, your bird just goes on a tear, and there's the sound of ninja stars and fireballs and screen shakes and the scoreboard screaming for mercy. Like, and then you just walk in the room and there's loot everywhere and the bird is innocently staring at you. Like, perfect.
It's also the first time I hatched one and ran around with it. It killed me with an AoE attack. So, it's even better.
Yeah, I think I fixed that. I know what you're talking about. There's a couple things birds used to be able to hurt you with. I think those are all patched up. But either way, comedy gold, right?
It was very funny. I wasn't even mad. I died in the convenient Scrobbled War, and it was very funny.
Nice.
So you've been streaming development of your next project, which still has a project name in front of it. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Project Summers, because all my projects are named after game show hosts at first, and Mark Summers is the one who got chosen at random for this one. So Summers is certainly far, far from complete, but it is, in its current state, it is a, let's see, what's the term? A run-based, a run-based 4X action arcade game. And what happens is there is an alien planet far away with an outpost on it and a company that says, we want to live here. Here's our outpost. We want to build farms and mines and all that civilization stuff. We've hired somebody, right? A frontiersman, if you will, to help settle the frontier. So your job is to explore that frontier. And I think anyone who's played Civ or Alpha Centauri or any of the nuanced stuff like Humankind or whatever, you've got that one unit that just runs around the map, like just by itself, like it scouts and discovers stuff, and you kind of don't even think about it, right? The unit's just doing its own thing while you're busy building your base. In this game, you play that unit, right? Your job is on your turn to explore hexes, find things, and maybe it's a fight. And when it's a fight, it's action mode, twin stick action, right down to the battlefield, dashing around, lasers, cooldowns, pew pew pew, boom boom boom, boom boom, like you're having a great time blowing up monsters. And then you go back to the strategy board, which is hexes to uncover. And there's loots to find. There are opportunities to find like resource caches, which you could take for yourself and just make your rider a little stronger. Or you could say, hey, community, I found this. You guys could use this to build some new stuff. And then your little beacon shows up, and the builder bot from the community goes beep boop, flies over and picks it up and takes it back, and then they can build more things. So you have this sort of relationship with the people who hired you, they're going to ask favors of you, and you're just like, well, my job is to explore the frontier. That's where the contract ends. But if you need help with certain things, why not be a pal and pitch in? Or you can say, no, I'm just going to do what I want to do. As long as I explore the frontier and meet my requirements, we're good. And the game's victory condition is not always get strong, fight boss, right? It could be you win when the colony here expands to have 2 generators, or you win when the outpost has conquered location X, and the win conditions are varied because it shouldn't just be about like running around getting strong. Otherwise, the colony fades too far in the background. So it's a balancing act, right? Like I want to make sure that there's this fun 4X happening with exploration and discovery and the construction of cool things. But I also want the player to feel engaged, like they are this unit in the world doing cool stuff and going from fun fight to fun fight.
Well, that's a really interesting little pitch, and I was kind of fascinated by watching the little bits and pieces I saw on stream. So I'm very curious to see more of that and watch it develop. But I do have like kind of one more Dungeonmans related question, which is just, is Dungeonmans finished?
So, I keep thinking, like, when do I make the forum post that says the sunset of Dungeonmans is here, right? And the answer is, I don't know that I ever will. Hatch and Slash was a big amount of work, and Dungeonmans does not pay the bills anymore, right? This can't be the game that I work on full time to make a living. However, I did get a really large surge of players because of a combination of the Hatch and Slash releasing, along with a video from Splattercat, who is this high-class YouTuber who plays indie Monster Crushers, and he just ran a Dungeonmans video and said, "Hey, a new content came out. Let's check it out." In the video, he didn't even get to the birds. He got right to the point where you'd unlock the birds and he had to stop because he makes half-hour-long videos. But that drove a whole bunch of eyeballs. There were other videos that popped up that drove a whole bunch of eyeballs. And for 2 months, the game was suddenly moving copies faster than it did at launch. All of a sudden, there was this hype and word of mouth picked up. People were coming by the Discord in droves, like just this really great summer of Dungeonmans. And I was very thankful for that. That is helpful for me in a number of ways. I have gainful employment day to day working on a game called Grit. But it's just nice to be able to see Dungeonmans succeed in these little bursts. That helps me with future development for other projects. Is Dungeonmans done? Every time it's a holiday time, what I really want to do, I want to do a Valentine's Day event. There's a Halloween event already. There's Hatch and Slash, but like a Valentine's themed event. I have some thoughts on what it would be. You can't. Love is a battlefield. It seems like a perfect thing to say, right? Get the Pat Benatar song, but you can't say battlefield anywhere near a video game, right? You can't say battlegrounds in a video game anymore. So what battle zone was taken in the 80s? What's left? Love is a battle place, right? So love is a battle place. It's kind of what I'm thinking of, like, well, can romance bloom on the battlefield, to borrow Metal Gear's old joke? There's a whole bunch of silly things in there. I don't want to get too referencey or too memey, but the idea being that there would be some Valentine's-themed content that fit the holiday. So I don't know if it means you're going to like marry the professor and start a farm somewhere, but this idea of combining things together and maybe playing matchmaker for greater result, that's the sort of gameplay I'm thinking.
I'm just imagining dating your old dead Dungeonmans now.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of weird shit you could do. I mean, the game is pretty goofy, right? So when you want to throw the idea of romance into it, there's a million goofy directions. And I don't want to go too far that way because honestly, the game has never really been about romance or what's between your legs. It's about crushing monsters. I don't want to get too far from that. But there is a sort of Valentine's matchmaking gameplay that is gnawing at me that I haven't really ever figured out. But one day.
I mean, there's plenty of fun taunts you could do.
Plenty of fun taunts. That's true, too.
But this has been a pleasure, quite frankly. And the last thing I have here on my document is just closing thoughts and shoutouts. So where can people find you? Where can people buy your video games? And where can they keep you employed as an indie game developer?
Hey, thank you for this. This was a lot of fun. And I do this anytime. This is great. So come by my Twitch channel, right? Twitch.tv/playdungeonmans. That is where I'm broadcasting as many days a week as I can, which is usually 4. That's in the mornings, though 8 to 10 Pacific AM, which is not a great time for a lot of people, I understand. So there's the Discord as well, the Dungeonmans Discord. Discord.gg/strength. We have our own vanity URL. How cool is that? Dungeonmans is available on Steam. Tangle Deep is available on Steam. That's a game that I helped finish that was created by the musician for Dungeonmans, Andrew Aversa, made his own game. Tangle Deep, it's on the Switch. You could play it there too. There's other stuff happening as well. The community for Dungeonmans. My shout out goes to all of these people. Here, you know what? Actually, I will shout out to one person in particular. I don't know if he's going to hear this, but Utoxin, my friend, thank you for holding the fort down so often when I'm gone. I was on vacation the last few days, and he's one of the lead mods there. He's just been part of the community forever, and I definitely appreciate your support, Tox buddy. Thank you so much. But that community has a game dev channel in there as well. So if you are somebody who is listening to this, you're like, man, I want to make video games. I'm awesome. Come by the game dev channel. Even the newest level 1ist jabroni is welcome to ask their level 1 jabroni questions. We love it. We eat it up, right? Because anytime somebody gets inspired to make something, that channel is winning. So, but also come by and talk about your cool Dungeonmans hero. That community is there for that too. Do a whole bunch of stuff. It's a really friendly place. So there's my pitch. Come to the Discord, come to the Twitch channel, say hi, ask me questions, ask other people questions. I want to answer them. I want you to have a good time.
Once again, just thank you very much for doing this interview, and I think at this point that's a wrap. We're done. We can end,
oh man,
we can
thank you so much. This was a delight.
Cheers.
Your Discord icon animates when you talk. This is blowing my mind. That's I'm gonna spend the rest of my night after this call giving myself an animated icon. That's the end of that. That's you've guided my night. I'm canceling the thing I'm doing next. All right. So I've got Audacity rolling. It's recording. I tested it a little earlier. It's using RTX voice, so I don't get the sound of my jet engine in the background. Should be good. Beautiful. Beautiful.
So I have both of my recordings running now. So if you're recording, I'm good to start literally whenever.
Let's roll.
So
yeah.
the best way to start this is just if you could give a 2-sentence introduction on who you are and what Dungeonmans is, then I can start with the what games what got you into video games when you were a kid.
Great. Well, hey, my name is Jim Shepard. I make games about crushing monsters and taking their stuff.